So we have two very different types of companies on stage here between WeTransfer and Yandex. So I thought, Gordon and Jane, do you mind introducing yourselves and sort of what your job means today, so that then we can kind of jump into metrics with a little bit of a framework of where you guys are coming from? Is that okay? Maybe we start with you, Gordon?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Gordon Willoughby, CEO of WeTransfer. For those of you that don't know WeTransfer...
How many people here have used WeTransfer before? Yeah, that's what I thought.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. OK, you know about it. It's the easiest way to share and send your creative ideas. There's a bit of background. Opened in 2009 by two Dutch entrepreneurs. We're now a very global company, but still proudly Dutch. We're available in about 196 countries. About 40 million people use us every month, sending about 1 billion files. What I think is slightly different about us as a SaaS business is we actually have two business models. So while we have a premium subscription SaaS business, WeTransfer Plus, we also have an advertising business, which is how we monetize all our free traffic. And it makes us look at metrics in a pretty different way, and what really drives us.
Cool. And then on a very different spectrum, Jane, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, well, I'm today with the Yandex Data Factory, and we are a provider of AI-based services for the industrial sector. Actually, our technologies come from our mother company, which is called Yandex, and is
And most of you guys have also heard of Yandex, right?
Well, it's just one of the largest internet companies in Europe no one usually heard about. That's because it's a leading Russian search engine and, well, many other services, but in Russia it's much more popular than Google. So my company, what we do, we use machine learning technologies and AI technologies developed by Yandex to bring these advantages to the traditional sectors, like in our case, to the industrial sector. Mm-hmm. So if we believe that AI is about to become as ubiquitous as electricity, we are those who are in charge of electrification.
So, Gordon, how much is your business, which kind of started with viral free adoption, which you could argue has no metrics at all, or at least didn't initially necessarily, how has your business evolved to use sort of, the data that comes from metrics, and how do you evaluate which ones would make sense for the company as opposed to, maybe Stuart Butterfield, it makes sense for Slack, but not for a business like yours?
Sure, and I think that's a really interesting thing. On the free business, we do track it, and one of the things we really track is its virality. Mm-hmm. So one of the strong metrics for us is anyone who sends a creative idea through WeTransfer gets more WeTransfer users. So there is metrics around that. But the other side of it, you're right, is we've moved from a startup to a scale-up. And by that I mean we've now got a sustainable business model. We've been profitable for a while, we're growing revenues, we're cash flow positive. So really, how do we scale this business fast? The metrics we really track are beginning to change. And as I was thinking about this, our time together, I was thinking about, it's one of the things, sometimes people get very stuck on one set of metrics. Yeah. And it can really lead you astray. And I think the title was, or wrong metrics. I think there are rarely wrong metrics, unless you miscalculate. And in the speaker pack, I'm told everyone's a domain expert here, so you won't be miscalculating. But for us, as the maturity of the business has changed, the metrics we track has changed. So we talked at the beginning, and this is one of those metrics that I think is not appropriate for a startup, but is more appropriate for a scale-up, is the rule of 40%. Yeah. Now, it seems to have got real traction with the investor community.
Could you explain that just really quickly for anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about?
Yeah, sure. It's a classic apples and pears kind of metric, because you're adding together your revenue growth percentage and your profit EBIT percentage, and ideally it should be greater than 40%. Now, for a really early stage startup where your revenues are growing exponentially, it could theoretically allow you to build up huge losses. Mm-hmm. Just not appropriate. But for a scale-up, it's much more a set of tram lines. And that's one of the ones we use a lot for our business to make sure we're on the right track. The second, I think, is all about, are you using the right metrics for your fundamental business model? Mm-hmm. So for us, another one people talk about, MRR, and then CAC, lots of what's your cost of acquisition? For us, actually, that's less relevant because whereas for most people, their free service is a big source of cost, for us, we've monetized it all. So in a sense, we have a negative CAC. And so for us to use that as a really important metric would be totally inappropriate. But where we do spend a lot of time is making sure we track the right, what I'd call input metrics. And for me, there's a big difference between output metrics, which are interesting, but rarely helpful in running your business, like profit, revenue. Because it doesn't actually, I want more revenue, doesn't tell me what to do. You know,
and I guess it's more backward-facing.
It's backward-facing, and when your investor says to you, I want more revenue, it's, yeah, so do I. But what should I be doing differently is where it'd be really helpful. So for us, we try and focus a lot more on what I'd call input metrics, which are really your levers for growth. So for us, in our SaaS business, engagement. How often are they actually using our product? Because that is absolutely fundamental.
So Jane, when you guys work with clients, what metrics do you guys use to evaluate success? And I can imagine that problem of knowing which ones to be watching is critical for usefulness. Yeah, that's
actually quite funny how it works because, well, you mentioned working with data and with metrics. And of course, for us, the metrics is a cornerstone because we are providing services which are directly optimizing some part of the customer's business. So basically, improvement of some metrics is exactly what we deliver. And the data is just the raw source material for us. Still, for customers, somehow, they are always concerned about their data. They very often start with saying, oh, you know, but probably we don't have enough data, or maybe it's not good enough, it contains mistakes, and so on and so on. And they pretty much never are concerned about their metrics, if their metrics are right, because they're quite sure they are. In reality, almost every time, it's just the opposite. Almost any business, if it's around for, I don't know, 3-5 years at least, already has enough data to use for AI to start doing something meaningful. While in terms of metrics, I think pretty much everyone, every customer we started working with, started with something really wrong. And actually, funny talk we had today, right beforehand, right? You said, oh, but for me as a journalist, the metric would be very simple, right? It's just page views. But now let's imagine that we use AI as a journalist and we put just this metric, page views. You know what you end up with? Well, Microsoft knows that very well. Maybe you remember that scandal about Microsoft Twitter bot, which became like the real asshole within one day, being racist and all kinds of bad things. That's because you only put one metric to be popular. And that worked. It optimized this metric, right?
Well, also what we were talking about is kind of reverse engineering a problem where a company kind of has maybe they want more revenue, or they have some sort of thing that they put up on a pedestal, and then they try to sort of make everything else fit that, right? They kind of work backwards, and it sounds like that can be dangerous because the data takes you to the wrong place, right?
Well, that's right, but there is also additional thing which is being brought by AI, besides of what was said. Because AI is so efficient in optimizing this particular metric, if you are not very precise in what you want to achieve, you will get to a very wrong place very quickly. So it's really dangerous. But why people are mostly mistaken in their first projects with AI is that, well, we tend to forget something which is obvious, right? Because AI doesn't have common sense, it's not obvious to it, right? It's obvious for every one of us that you shouldn't be an asshole when you are tweeting, right? You should be like a good journalist. But AI has one particular metric, popularity, and this is it. And that is something people very often forget. And that's also why we usually advise our customers to start with their machine learning projects or AI projects, with the projects which are short, small, but have very specific impact they want to measure.
Okay.
And that's because when you make mistake, you make it quickly, and you can correct it quickly.
So Gordon, when you were looking to kind of take WeTransfer to another level of scale, going more international, kind of becoming maybe more business friendly, sort of evolving the business naturally from what was originally this viral, product. Right. How much did you let the metrics, what the numbers that you saw as you were sort of, positioning the company, how much did those dictate strategy, and how much did you kind of have them come in after you had your strategic direction? It's sort of a chicken or the egg thing there.
And I'm afraid the answer is a bit of both, as opposed to is one or the other. So the fundamental strategy was obviously guided by some business fundamentals around how big do we think our product market fit, all that bit, because we wanted to make sure we were solving a problem which occurred to people regularly, and a lot of people. But after that, after we kind of understood what our fundamental business approach was going to be, it was very much about looking at metrics to understand how we needed to evolve from the current service. So if I think about, essentially we were a desktop-based, web-based file transfer service, we're now evolving much more into the mobile space, into much more collaboration and sharing, much less A to B, because that's actually what the data was showing us. That's how people were using or wanting to use the product. So it absolutely drives what you're doing. But I think Jane made a really great point, which is there is no single metric. There is no kind of silver bullet metric. It is always taking a series of metrics and trying to make sense of it. And ultimately, while I know SaaS is an incredibly metric-driven business, too few people stand back and say, does this make sense to me as a consumer? Because the metrics can lead you all over the place. But we were very, very data-driven about our user behavior.
So let's go deeper there, and I'm especially curious, Jane, without naming customers, if you just have any incidents that maybe jump to mind, when companies drift off, when they're not maybe chasing the right answer, what would be ways that they could self-correct or figure that out and maybe adjust their metrics so that they're not wasting tons of time and money?
Right. Well, there are a few things you can do beforehand, and there are a few things which you can do when things already go the wrong way. So first of all, beforehand, there are obvious ones, right? You need to make sure that you are trying to optimize and you're trying to measure or you are trying to improve something you really can influence. Like, for example, with a mobile operator, we did this work for a mobile operator. For them, user churn, is quite a huge problem. So if you save like 1% of your churn, you are saving millions of dollars. So they want to be more precise in the churn prediction, in predicting who is going to leave you so you can try and retain them. The problem is that's the wrong goal. Why is it the wrong goal? Is that after you get this prediction, and it's more accurate, that's what we had with one of the customers, it's much more accurate than your current one. The problem is it's much more accurate in a large segment of your customers. You then don't have tools for retaining. So you get better results, actually great result of the project, all the metrics are achieved, KPI is like, great.
But the business
is not improving at all. Yes. So you need to be as close as business as possible. And this is the most important one. And the second one, then in the process, while you are trying this, while you are accomplishing this process, you need to make sure that you are measuring it correctly. And again, that's a funny thing to say, right? It's kind of obvious for all of us who live in the internet. It's called A/B test. But when you are talking about the same kind of testing for these new algorithms with, bankers or, retailers, they are completely unaware. We had this experience with one of the banks when they sent the test messages for the test group in one day, and to the control group, they sent the messages in like 3 days later after the long holidays. And now they were supposed to compare the results. That's ridiculous, right? But that's what happens. So now in process, you need to make sure that your checks are right. And then afterwards, when you look at the results, you need to ask yourself, is there something where it can go wrong? Is there something you already see you actually forgot, and you should get back and you should add it, because for your first project, it will most probably be there, some kind of mistakes.
I think that's a really interesting point. One of the things that we got from data and kind of machine learning helps us develop a new product, which was back from the database came, there are multiple people from the same account and they can't be using it this amount of time. And so with data, it's also about interpretation. So going, why is that? And it's ended up with us developing a multi-seat product. We thought we were always a single-seat business, and clearly we're a multi-seat product with people wanting all the kind of admin hierarchy to control stuff. But it's one of those things you have to build on, as Jane was saying. You have to look, does this make sense? What's coming back?
Now, how would you guys recommend, if we have entrepreneurs in the audience, how do they avoid being paralyzed by sort of overwatching the metrics? You know, almost becoming indecisive because as soon as maybe something looks a little wrong, you start meddling and you know, the watch pot never boils. You know, you can pick your cliche there.
Well, in our work, when we talk to the businesses, we try to make it as simple as possible. In fact, your best metric, you probably also have some limitations, like you're trying to be a good guy, but basically your best metric is how profitable you are. So whenever you have some part of the process, you just look at the value created, look at the profitability, and this is your final metric.
Okay.
And if you are focused on that, this is it. Just simple as that. Now, of course, the trick is how to decompose all the other actions and how they lead it to this, your ultimate goal. But in case of AI, very often, when you use AI for operational decisions, you can delegate it to AI.
I think I'd bring it back to business is not fundamentally that complex, and SaaS businesses aren't. It's, you know, are you bringing in more revenue than you're losing, and when you bring in the revenue, is it costing you less to bring it in? You know, it's pretty fundamentally simple. So I would focus on what do you think are the key levers you can influence at any one point in time, and then focus on the biggest ones. Because you're right, you can get very distracted by the noise. But if you do, you end up kind of whiplashing a lot as opposed to following a clear strategy and remembering fundamentally you want people to engage with your product. And that is the closest I think you've got to the single most important metric.
Now, if you guys were advising a startup maybe that you met and you took a liking to, is there a metric that you would tend to avoid or just sort of a number that you think is overhyped that entrepreneurs should not be super worried about?
I've never been an entrepreneur, so to all those of you who are entrepreneurs, this is said humbly. If I was to invest in a company, there's 2 or 3 questions. Is it solving a problem? Is it solving an important problem to someone so that has a real cost? And is there a big enough marketplace for you to make money? And then if you've solved that, for me, the second one is, are people engaging with your product? So have you got a product that people want to use? So pretty much for me, it's engagement and usage and that.
Yeah. Well, I would say there's probably no silver bullet. There is no silver set of metrics you really need to kind of memorize and use everywhere. Moreover, I'm quite sure that it's just the opposite. The right metrics, they're changing, especially when you're a startup, right? At the different stages of your development, the different metrics are key for you, as it already was mentioned. So my advice would be, first, have some metrics and really be serious about them.
Totally.
Now, don't be as serious as making them permanent. Revise your metrics every quarter. That is it.
Agreed.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights with everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.